Hey folks, I'm Jeff. God Health. Welcome to this video about outcome to impact mapping. I want to show you a technique that I use with clients and that we teach to all the teams that we train for how to connect visually the strategic objectives of an organization, their high-level goals with outcomes, with the things that people do, with the products and services that we build, with the benefit of actually showing, particularly executives, what has to happen in order for the organization to make money. So we're going to jump into that in just a second here. I'm going to show you what's on this mural very quickly here and get my head out of the way so you can see that. So very, very quickly on the left side, if you want access to this mural, you can scan that code or go to bit.ly/outcome impact. You can get a chance to see this mural as well. We have a new book. It's called Who Does What by How Much. It's about objectives and key results. If you're interested in that, there is a QR code right there. I've got a newsletter called Continuous Learning. Scan that code, jump on over there, or click that link from the mural, and that'll take you there. And the article that inspired this video is actually 7 years old at this point, and you can find it on my blog by scanning that QR code or just clicking on the link there in the mural itself. All right, with that, the promos are out of the way. Let's jump into it here. I'll zoom out just a little bit so we can get the right things on the screen. There we go. Okay, so most organizations are going to tell you that the goals for the organization are going to be one of two things. They're either going to be make money, right, revenue, or build a thing, right? I need you to ship the mobile applications or the new CRM system by the end of the year, whatever it is. Both of those things sometimes come together. Ship this thing and make sure it makes money. Now that's great, but in between those two things, there is customer behavior, outcomes, or what we call key results. And what I want to show you today is a technique that's inspired by that article called Execs Care About Revenue. How do we get them to care about outcomes? And I'm going to show you this exercise that we do called Outcome to Impact Mapping that literally visually connects what people do in the system with what the organization cares about, and then how do we connect that to features as well. I'll talk about that very briefly at the end there. So we're going to have a fictional context here, an organization that has a strategic objective, which is rare for a lot of organizations. But in this particular case, this is a good organization, and they've put together a strategic objective for the time period starting now until the end of 2025. And their strategic objective is to provide the most flexible way to enable human resources, HR services, for startups and high growth companies by the end of 2025. So that's what they do. They provide sort of bolt-on HR services for organizations that don't have a robust HR function. So that's their strategic objective, and that's what the leaders, the executives in that organization have determined is the most important thing for them to work on over the coming 18 months or so. Terrific. Now, how do they know? Well, what are they measuring? Well, the execs, typically they measure what we call impact metrics. You'll see that over here on this side. Impact metrics, we define that in our books as the high-level measures of the health of the business. So these are literally the KPIs that are on exec dashboards. Things like, and in this particular case, right, customer retention, our operating margin, profit margin, right? In this particular case, they've got a professional services side of the business. So we want to see the revenue coming out of the professional services side of the business. And there's a software side of the business. So we want to see subscription revenue go up as well. So this is how the organization is measuring the health of the business and their progress towards this strategic objective, right? So we know that we're providing the most flexible way to enable HR services for these specific companies. If retention is going up, margin is going up, professional services revenue is going up, subscription revenue is going up as well. And generally speaking, they'll present that to the organization and say, here are our goals, good luck. Also build me these things because I know that these things are going to drive revenue. Well, we're going to fill in the gap. We're going to talk about outcomes, what people do in the system. And this is an exercise, again, that we do with the teams that we consult with, the teams that we coach, and the teams that we train as well. So let's get into that conversation. Okay, so the way that we start this is we ask the organization to pick anyone. First of all, to define their strategic objective, we've done that, and then the impact metrics that they're focused on for the coming 6, 12, 18 months. And then we say, okay, great, let's pick one of those. Any one of those, right? Let's just start anywhere at all. And so for the case of this video, we're going to start with this one, software subscription revenue. That's the one we're going to start with. And we say, great. What happens before someone pays us for their software subscription revenue, right? What happens? What happens, right? Before someone actually hands over a credit card or does a transfer for an invoice, what has to happen, right? We ask them. And they'll think about that. And we say, look, here's the guiding principle for thinking about how to answer that question. The way that I want you to answer that question is by focusing on this prompt right here. This prompt right here. I'm going to zoom way in on it for a second here as well. Who does what by how much? Coincidentally, the name of our book, right? But I want them to focus on this prompt, right? The way that you know that you're writing a good answer to this question is it actually fills in the blank for who does what by how much, right? So if we're going to focus on software subscription revenue, who does what by how much, right? Well, first of all, we want to see existing customers, right? That's the who, logging in to the software on a daily basis. Right? That's what they're doing. And by how much, right? At least 50% more than they're doing today. So this is something that people do in the system. This is called an outcome. It's a measurable change in human behavior that drives business results. It's also called a key result. If you're talking about objectives and key results, outcomes are key results when they answer the question, who does what by how much? So before we make money off subscription revenue, people are actually using the product. They're not going to pay for a product they're not using, and we want those folks to be using the product more. So existing customers are logging into the software on a daily basis, at least 50% more. That's pretty good, right? Subscription is a monthly, let's assume that it's a monthly or an annual subscription in this particular case. And so one of the things that we know that actually drives subscription revenue down is when people have a lot of trouble with the software itself. And so in this particular case, we want to see that the issues that people are having are actually reducing, right? There's fewer and fewer issues. How do we know that? They're complaining less, or they're reaching out to customer service to help them through basic technical issues less, right? So again, one of the things we want to focus on, again, existing customers, who does what, complain about technical issues to CS call center, let's just call it that, right? Less, right? So they complain less by at least 75%, right? Something along those lines. Now, what we're doing here is we're starting to build all of the various things that people do in the system, right? They use the system, they complain about the system, they discover and use more of the system, right? So one of the things that we could potentially do in here as well is to drop this in here and say, existing customers use at least 60% of the features in the product on average, right? Who does what by how much? Again, every single thing is who does what by how much. And we do this exercise with these leaders, and we ask them to start to fill out this row, right? And we do this for every one of these impact metrics here at the top, right? So we're moving pretty quickly here, but we only focused on software subscription revenue. But we would do this and we'd fill this out for every single one of these impact metrics. Now, the next thing that we ask these folks to do is we say, great, let's pick one of these outcomes, these leading outcomes, and talk about, well, what do people do in the system before we achieve those behaviors, right? What behaviors can we observe that indicate that this next thing is going to happen? So let's pick one of those, right? Let's grab this one here. Existing customers logging into the software on a daily basis, at least 50% more, right? So what happens before that? Right, what's kind of the leading indicator of that? And we're going to do this exact same exercise again, right? We're going to talk about, well, who does what by how much, right? before existing customers log into the software on a daily basis, at least 50%, right? So one of the things that might happen is existing customers ask to reset password, right? 90% less, something along those lines, right? Because we know that if they can sign in successfully, right, they're going to be more motivated to sign in on a daily basis along those lines. Maybe another thing that happens is existing customers click through new feature announcement emails, 30% more. So we send them emails on a regular basis that says, hey, we've got a new feature. We want you to come use it. And they click through, at least 30% more on those emails. That gets them to sign in on a daily basis, right? And so what we're saying here, right, we're saying is that there's a connection, a direct connection between these activities and this one here, right? And there's probably a lot more of these orange ones that we can put in place to drive existing customers to log in and then to reduce complaints and to get those existing customers to use at least 60% of the product. And so what we're asking folks to do in this exercise is to build this massive tree of Post-it notes, right? Because what we're saying is that these things have to happen, right? So that this can happen. And if this happens, well, that starts to drive software subscription revenue, which is pretty great. And what we're starting to do here is to literally visualize the connection between what people do in the system and how the organization makes money or measures success at the impact metric level. Now, for the sake of this video, I've kept this very, very simple and very, very light. But when we do this exercise, we fill out everything, right? We do this exercise for every single one of those blue impact metrics at the top. And we discover or we brainstorm all of the various ways and the things that people do in the system that drive subscription revenue and professional services revenue and operating margin and customer retention and all of those things. And then we look for leading indicators for all of those things as well. And so we could end up with a hugely robust tree of activities, right? This happens first, these things happen first, that leads to these things happening and to these things happening, and then ultimately to the health of the business. By the way, for illustration purposes here, I've only got 2 rows, but this doesn't mean that you can't go 3 rows or 4 rows down, right? This happens, then this happens, then this happens, and then we make money along this. So it becomes a very, very robust visualization of all of the outcomes, all of the things that people do in the system before we actually make money. Now, what's interesting about that is that once you do have that fully baked tree, spend a half day maybe as a workshop building this together as a team with your data scientists and business analysts and et cetera, we're going to have a lot of different outcomes that we could optimize for. And that's a really powerful thing to discuss with your executives, to say, look, here's a big tree of stuff. Which of these do we want to work on? Look, there's 150 Post-it notes on this this whiteboard. We can't possibly optimize for 150 different customer behaviors at the moment. Which ones are the most important? We have 10 teams, right? We have 12 teams. Right, we can take on 12 to 15 of these. Which are the 12 to 15 that are most important right now? And that's a fascinating conversation, because now the executives have to make a decision that says, look, I know I need to make more money. There are 50 different things that can lead to profit margin or professional services revenue, but I've only got 12 teams. So which of those 50 things, right, which 12 of those things, which 13, 14, 15 of those things are the most important ones we're going to focus on right now? It doesn't mean that the other things aren't important. It just means that for right now, we're going to focus on the ones that we select. And that becomes a really great exercise, because then we can say, okay, great. Strategically, for the next 6, 12, 18 months, we're going to focus on these key results. And now we can task the organization with filling in how they're going to support those key results. So we're writing this big objective and these key results. What's interesting too is, as you start to build this, perhaps you've noticed this already, is that once you get to 2, 3, or 4 layers in, essentially what we're building here is a bottom to top customer journey map, right? Customers do all this stuff, then they do this stuff, then they do this stuff, and then we make money, right? And we don't have to call it that if it's a biased term, but that's essentially what we're doing here. The last point I want to make is that sometimes when we get to the last step, sort of the first thing that customers do, well, there's a question of, well, what are the features that drive that? Or what are the features that might drive that behavior as well? And we can do that by, adding a line here down at the end and just saying, look, below this is actual output, right? Things that we might build, that we think about, right? But a feature, a solution, an application, a campaign or an initiative or a product or whatever it is that we want to build. And we can talk about the various products that we have or the products that we want to build and how they might connect to these activities. That's a kind of a bonus. It's an add-on that starts to move us back into the conversation around output. I would recommend that you leave that out of this initial conversation, because the real goal of this, again, is to visually connect what your executives care about, which is generally going to be this stuff up here, right? These impact metrics, with what are the things that we can actually influence on a day-to-day basis, which is this stuff here. What are people doing in the system on a daily basis, right? And how can our work adjust that? I hope you found that valuable. If you have any questions at all, please reach out to me from my website. And if you have any questions that aren't answered there, grab me on LinkedIn. Check out all the stuff on the right. I hope you found this valuable. Thank you very much.